Welcome, Sens Talk.
Puts the lines in. Pinto back across. Check in, scores! Brady Kachuk makes it 2-0. Hit alone. Scores!
Tim Stutzlock cross. Kachuk score! The captain, Brady Kachuk, buries it with 1:18 to go.
See you later. Go, Sens, go. Welcome, Sens Talk. My name is Brandon Plant, and I'm your host. I have a very, very special video for all of you today as we discuss the Shane Pinto contract situation. Frankly, I'm a little surprised that Pinto and your Ottawa Senators have not yet agreed on a deal, but we're going to break that all down in this video. But before we get to that, we have some breaking news today coming out of the nation's capital as the Ottawa Senators have added to their management group as Steve Staios has hired Rob DiMaio as the new director of player personnel and professional scouting. This is a very, very impressive hire for the Ottawa Senators and their management group for a multitude of reasons. Primarily, look, Ottawa and their management team has been notoriously over the years very, very thin. I mean, there was literally the bare bones, okay? Like the bare bones. They never hired, excess guys. They hired exactly who they needed, and that's it. But of course, we've seen under the new ownership, the new regime, that is not going to be the case. And that has continued with a massive hire today. Obviously, player personnel is important, but most importantly, for professional scouting. Ottawa and the professional scouting has been horrid over the last decade or so. That's why we saw some of those pro scouts get let go the last couple months. So DiMaio comes in and has a very, very impressive record. So, once again, it's very notable and important that Ottawa is investing in their management group, especially when it's a great hire like this. Look, DiMaio helped the St. Louis Blues win a Stanley Cup in 2019 in the exact same role. He found some of the key guys to help the Blues win the Cup that year. So that right off the bat is some pretty good news, considering the fact that he's bringing Stanley Cup pedigree, winning experience as well to this franchise to help them, bring in some good players. In a pivotal offseason, I might add. He's won a cup in the last 5 years, so that's huge. He was also, the last couple of years, the assistant general manager in Anaheim, and of course the GM of their AHL affiliate, the San Diego Gulls. So he's got a lot of experience throughout hockey. He's a hockey guy, and it never hurts to have more hockey guys in your management group. So this is clearly a guy with a strong background in the game, which makes this a very, very nice hire, a great hire, and it's always very good, like I've already said, to see some true investment in the management group. So a great hire for Steve Staios. And welcome to Ottawa, Rob DiMaio. Once again, a great, great hire. As I already mentioned, the offseason this year, as we're about to get into, so pivotal for the Ottawa Senators. As next year, we all know they got to make a push. So bringing in a guy like this should definitely help them do that. So welcome to Ottawa, Rob DiMaio. Now with that, let's get into today's video as we break down Shane Pinto and his contract situation. It's a really interesting situation here for Shane Pinto and the Ottawa Senators where, look, Shane Pinto going into last offseason was expected to get a large contract extension. But of course, as we all know, that gambling scandal happened, which cut his season in half. Of course, because he was suspended for half the season. So Ottawa and Pinto punted this decision to now and just signed a league minimum deal last year. So, we're looking at a deal that is going to be a bit more than it probably was expected to be going into last offseason, which is great for Shane Pinto, not so great for the Ottawa Senators, and that's probably why this deal has yet to be signed. But before we get into numbers and we talk about comparables and this and that, let's take a look at Shane Pinto, the player. Let's talk about it, right? So look, Shane Pinto last year had 41 games, 9 goals, 18 assists for 27 total points. In a full year, that's 18 goals, 36 assists for 53 points. Not too bad, not too shabby, especially for a guy that was primarily playing on the third line. So of course those numbers are great, especially when you take the 41 games he played and put it to a full 82-game season, 53 points. Very, very impressive. I do think it's important to note, however, that Shane Pinto came out flying. He came in hot, some would say. If you're an OG Sens fan, you would get that. But Shane Pinto in his first 21 games, 18 points. Came out flying all over the place, getting points left, right, and center. Now, his last 20 games, not anything to, get upset about or laugh at or scoff at, so to speak. 9 points in the final 20 games, 3 goals, but he obviously slowed down. So what is the real Shane Pinto? Is it the 18 points in the first 21 games, or is it the 9 points in the final 20? It's probably somewhere in between. So, we're probably looking at a guy that's probably going to get next year between 40 to 60 points in a middle six role, which is, of course, very valuable, especially for a guy like Shane Pinto, who's just 23 years old, okay? He hasn't even played 3 full seasons in the National Hockey League, and he's putting up very, very solid numbers, like literal middle six numbers already. So the sky is the limit for the kid. Clearly, he's got a lot of talent, so that's why you want to pay him a bit more, which we're going to get into in a second. But as well, you're not exactly sure exactly what you have on Shane Pinto. I'm not saying he's going to be a Colin White. I think Shane Pinto is a core piece, and we're going to talk about this later. He's a core piece for the future of this franchise. But you have to understand the hesitancy with the cap situation, which of course we'll get into later, why Ottawa is not willing to sign him long-term for a high AAV. They're going to be careful about this, especially since he's not played, over 200 games in the National Hockey League. He's played 140 games, 30 goals, 40 assists for 70 total points, a point every 2 games. Not too bad for a 23-year-old, obviously, especially a guy like Pinto. In his first full season, remember a year ago or so, had to play the full year in the top 6 because of Norris's injury, scored 20 goals. So he's clearly got some, very good talent. He's clearly got a good offensive ability in the National Hockey League. I can only see that improving. But at the same time, if you're the Sens GM, you got to think about the whole roster, so I do understand it. But, once again, if you're looking at Shane Pinto in his career, these are very positive numbers for a young player. He's also got a 50.1% face-off win rate, so that's just above league average as well. He was a very strong face-off performer in the NCAA with North Dakota as well. So Pinto, obviously for center, winning face-offs is critical, and Pinto is one of the best at it on this team by far. So that's enough rambling on the numbers. I've already alluded to it multiple times about Pinto, his contract situation, the Sens cap situation, and everything in between. We might as well jump to it. So look, firstly, I want to say this. Shane Pinto is an RFA. He's not going anywhere. He will be an Ottawa Senator next year. No doubt about it. If you were concerned about that for whatever reason, don't be. He's staying. Believe me on that. I also think it's important to note that, the Sens and Elliot Friedman noted this back in October when everything was, coming out, the scandal for the gambling situation with Shane Pinto. Elliot Friedman mentioned this. The Sens refused. They refused. So this is where the best-in-class moniker comes from. They refused to run a smear campaign on Shane Pinto to lower his AAV when the gambling scandal broke way back then, right? So they refused to do that. They didn't care. They punted the situation to now, knowing that more likely than not, the ask would be higher when looking at a long-term extension in a year from then. But they didn't care because they cared about the relationship they had with Shane Pinto. We also have to remember that these are people. These are not just objects. These are not just pieces in a game, right? So I thought that was a great change of pace compared to the previous regime. We'll just leave it at that. But more importantly, that has to mean a lot for the player because that happens. This is a business. There is some scummy things that go on, and players do have smear campaigns go against them, right? So that's something to also keep in mind where Shane Pinto definitely feels probably at home and comfortable with the Sens management and with the organization as a whole. So there's no doubt in my mind that Shane Pinto wants to stay here. In fact, Gary Ock has said that he wants to stay here. The issue is, as it always is, it's the money, the ask. How much he wants compared to how much Ottawa is willing to give. Of course, it's pretty simple. It's all about finding that middle ground. Now, as I just mentioned, Bruce Garriock has mentioned both parties are very interested in having a reunion, of course. Sens management has said time and time again that Pinto is a core piece of this franchise and of the core. So clearly the two want to stay with one another. But Garriock has reported that Pinto is asking roughly for $5 million per year on a 5 to 6 year deal, which frankly, we'll get into in a second, I think is a very fair ask. You have to ask a little bit more than you're likely going to get in a negotiation. That's how it, works out. And we're going to talk about the middle ground, what likely will happen on a deal like that in a few minutes. But a $5 million ask is not that preposterous when you look at Shane Pinto's career so far and how he's improved every single year. And frankly, how he has adapted into some really tough situations. Thrust into a top 6 spot in his first year in the National Hockey League, 20 goals, above 50% faceoff rate. Last year, scandal, league-wide news, okay? I mean, that's an embarrassing situation. Missed a half of the season, came back, came out flying, and had a very strong season ultimately. So this is a guy that can battle. This is a guy that's proven he belongs in the NHL. This is a guy that definitely demands a higher AAV than your average player. So the ask isn't outlandish. But for the Senators and their cap situation, which we're going to get into in a minute here, you know, the ask may be reasonable, but as I just said, you have to find that middle ground because, you know, the Sens have other guys to sign. They have other things they have to do. They can't exactly just pay guys, you know, what they want or what they deserve. They have to find some sort of middle ground to make it work. So obviously, as I've already mentioned, the Ottawa Senators are not really interested in getting to $5 million on a 5 to 6 year deal. But Garriock also noted that the two may come together more likely than not. If they cannot come together on a long-term deal, it's more likely than not they will come together on a 2-year bridge deal, and then once again punt this down the road and see where they are at in about a year and a half or so. So that's also a likely scenario. And I know what you're thinking. The restraint, the dish out the dough, might seem very odd at first. To me, it was very odd as well. But I went into Cap Friendly. I took a look at the Sens cap situation. I kind of estimated, you know, the guys that got to sign, the money they want to have, the acquire guys in free agency through trade. You want to have some cap space as well during the year to make some further acquisitions if necessary. So I took a look at everything, and when you take a look at the cap situation, especially with the projected Parker Kelly and Shane Pinto contract, Kelly as well as an RFA, by the way, the situation where Ottawa is unwilling to give $5 million on long-term deal starts to make a bit more sense. Look, assuming Josh Norris is not on the LTIR, the Sens have about $12 million of cap space without Pinto and Kelly signed, okay? So not only do they need to sign Shane Pinto, they got to sign Kelly as well, but they also, like I've already mentioned, need to have space to bring in reinforcements. They also potentially have a Hamnick buyout, which will clear up immediate cap space under $1 million for the next year, but also something to keep in mind for the next couple years, right? So you quickly realize that if the Sens do $5 million a year, without moving out any money, whether that's Matthew Joseph, which Garriock has noted is a guy that might be dealt. Another guy Garriock has noted that might be dealt is Jacob Chychrun. They'll have just about $5 million left after signing Parker Kelly as well. Look at your screen right now. That's my projected sort of situation here. If the Sens sign Pinto for about $4.5 million in that middle ground spot there, I don't know if he's going to get 4.5, between 4 to 4.5 on a long-term deal. Seems like a fair compromise. So I just gave him 4.5 for this practice. You got Kelly there at $2 million. That leaves Ottawa with about $5 million left. Not a lot of money. Not a lot of money, okay? So you quickly see that the Sens don't have a lot of money to work with here. I will say, and we'll talk about this in my conclusion, I'm personally very okay with the long-term extension between $4 to $5 million for Shane Pinto. I think a guy like that, you make it work for. But we'll get into that in a couple minutes here, because I asked Sens Talk statistician Trent Reynard to take a look at some comparable players for Shane Pinto, that being his point totals, all his advanced analytics, his age, his position, and everything in between, to look at comparables to see recent RFA centers at around his age, what they signed for. And if you look at your screen right now, it's quite clear that many of the comparable players for Shane Pinto got recent deals in the range of $2 to $3 million for 2 to 3 years. That's likely what Ottawa's looking to do. Now, if you look at the screen, I mean, I'm not going to compare him to a Trent Frederick or a Howden, for example, but a Newhook or a Velarde, that is a comparable I think I'm very comfortable with for Shane Pinto and that potential contract situation, especially Velarde at just under $4 million, just at $3.5 million or so there. I think that is what's more likely than not going to happen for Shane Pinto on a 2-3 year deal. Somewhere in the range of $3 to $4 million is likely what he's going to make, probably closer to 3 to 3.5, just because Ottawa is unwilling to do 5 for 5 to 6 years. I don't see them, doing $4 million for 2 to 3. So between 3 to 3.5 is more likely than not what Ottawa's looking at on a bridge deal. But frankly, and I'm going to just get to my conclusion now, this frankly reminds me of the Drake Batherson situation from a few years ago. This is a guy that continues to improve every single season, is a critical part of your core, and without him, this team gets very, very much worse, okay? So this is a guy you want to have here long term, and this is a guy that on a $5 million per year deal, for a potential second-line center of the future, especially, with the future of Josh Norris being very uncertain, that's a very team-friendly deal. I say you do what you got to do to keep a guy like this on this team long term. You sign him for $4.5 to $5 million for 5 to 6 years and make the space if necessary. This is a great deal. Centers are very, very coveted. A guy like this who can play in your top 9, primarily in, that third line role, but maybe even in that second line role, is a guy that's very, very valuable. As the cap situation, the cap is going to go up over the next few years. Contractors are going to get off the books for sure. This is a guy you got to keep around long term. And if he's asking for $5 million for 5 years, I say you write the check, sign it, give it to him, and laugh and run the other way. Because this is a great deal that, frankly, this is not a Colin White situation. This is a Drake Batherson situation. This is a guy that's proven he's only getting better and better and better. And, once again, in his first year, 20 goals in a top 6 role against some of the toughest guys in hockey. He's a center going up against Crosby, Bergeron, etc. This guy has proven he's worth the dollar ask. So, yeah, I get it. Once again, you don't want to sign him for 5 years. You don't want to lock yourself into, a high cap hit situation on a player that's only played under 200 games. I understand that perspective. If Ottawa signs him for 2 to 3 years at $3 to $3.5 million, I won't be upset about it at all. Once again, this is a guy that will be here for the next few years. It's just, if you can lock a guy up like this long term, and you don't have to worry about your top 6, frankly, down the middle, or even the top 9, I should say, down the middle, for the next 4, 5, 6, 7 years, you do it. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. That might be controversial. I think a lot of people would probably agree with me, but I am very curious to see what you all have to say down below. But yeah, besides that, thank you all for watching. I appreciate your support. I'll see you in the next couple of days. I just did a very, very good interview in the last few days with David Foote, the play-by-play voice of the Belleville Senators, to recap the Belleville Senators playoff run, the season, and everything in between. So stay tuned for that on likely Thursday night. So stay tuned for that. Keep an eye out for that one Thursday night here on youtube.com/SensTalk. But besides that, thank you all for watching. Once again, comment down below. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one. Go Sens, go.